Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever picked up a guitar for the very first time, learned maybe 2 or 3 basic chords, and immediately felt like, yep, I'm ready to headline a stadium tour? Or, maybe you downloaded a new language app, breezed right through that very first lesson, and felt like an absolute linguistic genius on day one. It's a completely universal feeling, right? That sudden massive rush of competence. And that is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Really? Why does starting something new feel so incredibly easy? It's kind of a fascinating phenomenon that we've all experienced, but, well, we rarely stop to actually analyze it. We usually just accept that initial rush of capability, give ourselves a nice pat on the back, and just ride the wave. But what if there's a documented structural reason for this initial breeze? What if feeling like an absolute natural isn't just a fluke?
To answer that, we're looking at a foundational source text today. It's an excerpt titled, "The Ascent of Early Mastery, The Learning Curve Explained." And this single line is essentially going to be our map. We're going to carefully deconstruct this framework together to understand the hidden architecture of how we actually begin to learn literally any new skill.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the ascent of early mastery. Let's break down this specific, highly intentional phrase, early mastery. I mean, it sounds almost like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Mastery usually implies, years and years of grueling, repetitive practice, but our source text completely validates that initial rapid progress we experience. It defines this initial phase of skill acquisition as an upward ascent. You're not just fumbling around in the dark, you're actively and steeply climbing. You're achieving a legitimate form of mastery, just very, very early in the overall process.
And what's truly fascinating is exactly where our source places this concept. It's specifically isolated as the focus of Chapter 8 in the broader text. I mean, think about what that implies. The author didn't just toss this at the very beginning of a book as some throwaway introduction, right? They built up to it. By isolating this phenomenon in Chapter 8, the text underscores that understanding this early ascent is actually a complex, absolutely crucial component in the broader context of learning. It deeply deserves its own specific focus and deep dive.
All right, moving on to Section 2, defining the learning curve.
Now, what's really interesting here is how we formally define the overarching structure. The learning curve isn't just some corporate buzzword you hear thrown around in meetings. It is the literal, documented journey of acquiring new knowledge or skills. It's the conceptual line that tracks our proficiency over time. And when we realize that learning isn't just a straight, predictable line, but a curve with distinct, measurable phases, well, it completely changes how we approach everything, from picking up a new hobby to starting a whole new career. The text establishes a pretty stark dichotomy here. On side A, we have the beginning, explicitly labeled as the easiest part. And implicitly, over on side B, we have the rest of the curve, the challenge. By forcefully stating that the beginning is the absolute easiest, the text basically forces us to acknowledge that the unstated remainder of the curve is going to be the real hurdle. That honeymoon phase where everything feels completely effortless, where progress is just cheap and plentiful, that is strictly contained to side A.
So, the crucial point is, Section 3, why beginnings are easy.
Let's just walk through the literal, mechanical progression implied by the phrase, the ascent of early mastery. Step 1 is the start. This is ground zero. You know absolutely nothing, your total blank slate. Then, step 2 is the upward ascent. And remember, this isn't a slow, painful slog. This is a rapid, almost frictionless climb, where every single new piece of basic information yields a massive, noticeable improvement in your ability. Finally, step 3 is reaching that point of early mastery. That's the peak of that initial climb where everything just clicks and you feel incredibly capable given how little time you've actually invested.
Let's see how this all builds into the core premise of our source text. Breaking it down really clarifies everything. 1. A definitive learning curve exists. 2. This curve has a distinct, isolated beginning phase. And 3. This beginning is uniquely easy. I want to point out here that the text doesn't say the beginning is merely fun or exciting, though, it certainly might be. It uses the superlative word easiest. It's making a definitive, structural claim about the utter lack of friction right at the start of any new pursuit.
Let's wrap this up with Section 4, navigating the early ascent. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact phrasing from our source, why the beginning is the easiest part. The text intentionally validates our internal feelings, that amazing sense that everything is clicking into place effortlessly. It isn't just some trick of the mind. Honestly, it's an absolute epiphany to realize that the architecture of learning itself makes the start fundamentally lacking in friction.
Now here is exactly why this matters to you as a learner. The easy start is structural. It is not an illusion. When you feel like a linguistic genius on day one of learning a new language, or when you first pick up coding or painting, you're experiencing a documented structural phase of the learning curve. It's not just blind luck, and it's not just because you're naturally gifted, though, hey, you might be. It's because the curve itself is designed to give you that upward ascent of early mastery. Acknowledging this helps us beautifully manage our expectations.
But of course, acknowledging that the beginning is the easiest part forces us to confront a slightly more, intimidating reality. If we accept the premise of our source text that early mastery is just an initial upward ascent, we have to ask the provocative question, what happens when the easy part actually ends? If the beginning is the easiest part, what exactly does the rest of the learning curve look like? It's a question that directly arises from the text, leaving us to ponder the inevitable plateau and the deep, challenging work that must necessarily follow our early mastery. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this framework helps you fully appreciate and navigate your very next early ascent.